Buongiorno a tutti, sono le 7:30, ma sono sveglio dalle 5. Benvenuti nella nuova puntata su Hollywood, Reset Hollywood. Oggi parliamo di un personaggio stregone, Christopher Lee. Allora, Christopher Lee è un attore che tutti conosciamo. Parla sul potere della magia nera in alcune interviste che poi vedremo in seguito, di rituali satanici, e afferma che non ci sia nulla di falso in tutto ciò. Christopher Lee è famoso per aver interpretato Saruman nel Signore degli Anelli, ma ha un passato come attore cinematografico molto lungo. Ha quasi 70 anni di film e programmi televisivi. Una cosa interessante: ha quasi sempre impersonificato il ruolo di villano, di demone, di stregone, di cattivo. Tutti i film di Christopher Lee hanno contenuti oscuri ed occulti. Guardiamo un'intervista di 45 anni fa di Christopher Lee e poi continuiamo la ricerca.
Is it easier to play an evil character rather than a good one, such as Duke de Richelieu in The Devil Rides Out?
No, I think that to play a good character is considerably more difficult. I think to explain that, to play a bad character is considerably more enjoyable as a rule, both for me and also hopefully for the audience, because they usually have better characterizations to play with. That is to say, the parts are usually better written, and one can create perhaps more of an impact with a bad character, an evil character, a wicked character. But you always must remember this, that at the same time you're taking the audience a bit into your confidence, and although you're not speaking directly to them, you are in effect saying, look, this can't happen, don't worry, or this can happen, so be careful, don't try and do it yourself. There is always a certain sympathy for the bad person, because they almost invariably lose, and they usually have certain rather entertaining and appealing qualities to them. Also, they're the ones that the public, the audience, usually remember rather than the good people. You see, to play a good person without being goody-goody and without being somewhat overbearingly, perhaps self-satisfied and smug, is very difficult. To play a bad person and make it believable is also difficult, but you've got more to play with, if you follow me. To make the unbelievable believable is the most difficult thing of all, of course. So if you're taking somebody who is inherently bad, and it's impossible, to make the audience believe that is a great challenge. But to make the character of a good person more interesting is a greater challenge, I think.
Do you regard black magic as being purely fictitious, or is there some truth in it?
Some truth. 100% truth. There is nothing fictitious about black magic, in any way whatever. It is a fact. It is a fact which has existed for several thousand years. I mean, when we talk about black magic, we are talking about Satanism, necromancy, alchemy, witchcraft, the worship of Satan, the worship of dark forces, whether it's voodoo, juju, whether it's something practiced in the Western world or the Eastern world, whether it's easily defined or not easily defined, the order of the left-hand path, the following of this, the following of that. It is basically the worship of the force of evil as embodied by Satan, Lucifer, the princes of darkness and their legions and so on. In a very simple sense, of course, it goes much more deeply than that. It is a fact. It is a desperately dangerous fact. It does exist. It exists around us today. Satanic ceremonies will be happening in Britain tonight, very definitely. Ask any priest, ask any member of the forces of law and order, and they will tell you that Satanism as such, it's there, and it has been for thousands of years. Man has worshipped the devil longer than he has worshipped perhaps an established religious figure.
Do you think you're in any danger in mimicking it in front of the camera?
No, that's an interesting question, because I must admit that it did enter our minds when we were performing some of these ceremonies. You see, I am playing, as I told you, a priest. The various ceremonies that are carried out by the priest, in this case myself, and the members of his group or coven, are blasphemous ceremonies, totally blasphemous and totally profane. They have to be. That is to say, they must be profane and blasphemous to be effective. This is part of the ritual and part of the belief of these people, that in order to make any kind of ceremony totally effective, it must be the exact diametrical opposite of the real ceremony. That is to say, if you make the sign of the cross, you do it like that, upside down. If you are going to carry out a satanic ceremony, whether it's a baptism or a particular group of people doing something like trying to raise an elemental or trying to create the perfect situation for an evil spirit or trying to produce evil vibrations and so on, they plug in, so to speak, to the force of evil like plugging in on a switchboard with a telephone. In order for this to be effective, it must be carried out, as I've already said, by a consecrated person, i.e. a priest, and it must also be carried out on consecrated ground. Now, in this film, I, as a priest, am carrying out these ceremonies, like baptism, in the name of the Dark Lord, in a real church. Now, obviously, I'm an actor. At least I hope people think I am. And I am therefore an actor playing a part. So are the other people in front of the camera who are taking part in the ceremony with me. We are all acting. I asked the parents of the baby, the real baby that I baptized in this real church in a blasphemous way, if they objected, if it worried them, this 5-week-old baby. And the parents, who are very young, said, no, it doesn't worry us. We are Catholics. Our child will be baptized by a Catholic priest. We will tell him about this, but it doesn't worry us. And the father gave the most sensible reason for this. He said, it's only a film. And if you can think of it in that way, fine. I have a rather vivid imagination, and some of the people who were working with me in this sequence were also discussing this. And we felt a little uneasy. You know, you are saying terrible things, and you are saying it on consecrated ground. But then the other side of you takes over, the logical side, and says, look, we're only actors doing this, you know. We're not doing it for real. We were sort of looking at the roof to see if there was any sign of it falling in on top of us, but nothing happened. I think we were far more worried about dropping the baby, to be quite honest. While we're on that subject, it might be interesting to say, amusing to mention, that the baby certainly got its own back on me. When it came to the actual baptism of the child, I have already told you that the parents didn't object, because I was making the sign of the cross on the child's forehead in supposedly blood, upside down, and baptizing the child into the service of the Dark Lord. And the child, obviously, was getting a bit bored and a bit cold and didn't like being taken away from his parents and held in my arms and then held in somebody else's arms. And it was making a lot of noise. And I started to speak very quietly, and there was complete and total silence, which impressed everybody. And I myself thought, well, you know, it's listening. It was staring at me with rigid concentration. And I suddenly realized why there was this total silence and this rigid concentration. The child was retaliating in the way in which it knew best, all over me, and all over the lady who was holding the child. Well, all I can say is it speaks volumes for our self-control that none of us broke up, because, of course, it was extremely funny.
Why has there been a resurgence of interest in the subject?
I honestly don't know. I've been asked this question all over the world. I've talked to people who are serious professional students of the occult. I've talked to a man who wrote a whole book about the occult in America called The Occult Explosion. I think it's a form of escapism. It's the fact that in this day and age we do live in a somewhat disagreeable world in many respects that I don't have to even talk about. Everybody knows this is a fact. And people are constantly seeking for a way out, whether it's to gratify their own desires or whether it's to find a way out of their own loneliness, or whether it is looking for power or physical indulgence or whatever you like to call it. I think it's always this question of people looking for a road out, an exit, an escape, some form of safety valve which will help them to blow off steam. They don't realize how dangerous it is to get involved in this respect, because inevitably they start at a lower level and then they get absolutely under the control of the bosses, because the bosses exist. They have the same ranks in the Church of Evil as they have in the good church. They do. They have ranks in the hierarchy of the priesthood, just as you have bishops and deacons and archbishops and cardinals and so on. You have various ranks and grades, like Magister Templi, the master of the temple, Ipsissimus, the sort of #1 top man. And this is not just occult writing for the sake of writing. This is a fact, and people really believe in this. As a matter of fact, there is a church in Los Angeles called the Church of Satan, which is run by a man called Anton Sandor LaVey, who has written 2 books. I'm not sure that he intended to be taken too seriously, otherwise, obviously, if it was true and complete Satanism, it wouldn't be permitted. But he sent me a copy of 2 of his books because he'd seen a picture I'd done with Sammy Davis Jr. in which I'd played the devil, a very sort of modern, up-to-date devil, Lucifer. The thing was called Poor Devil. The film was called Poor Devil. It was very amusing. It was a comedy. And he sent me a copy of one of these books, which was headed Regi Satanas, which means Satan is king, more or less. And he wrote underneath to Christopher Lee, a fine actor and a perfect devil. And from Sandor LaVey, well, I took that as a compliment. I don't think that's intended to be taken too seriously. That is all out in the open. But the real thing is something which I wouldn't be prepared to discuss. I have never attended a ceremony of this kind. I would not even begin to discuss what actually takes place during a Black Mass because it is so appallingly blasphemous and so repulsive and so unbelievably foul. Not just a question of hundreds of years of ritual, but what actually happens, what people actually do, and what is done to the host, and what is done to the cup, and so on. Something I wouldn't be prepared to discuss in public. Enough people have written about it. Joris Karl Huysmans wrote about it. Dennis Wheatley has too, of course.
How did you come to play the part of Scaramanga in the James Bond film The Man with the Golden Gun?
Can I, just before we get into that, just make a point that, by the way, that what I've been discussing and what I've been telling you about all these terrible things, it does not come from inside knowledge by any manner of means. I don't, as I said, have a private line of any kind which feeds me this sort of information. I know no more about it than anybody else who can read about it in the book. How did that happen? How did it happen that I came to play Scaramanga? Well, I was asked by the director and the producer if I'd like to play the part. It's as simple as that. I think it probably goes a little bit deeper. Ian Fleming was my cousin. There is a Scaramanga. I have met him. He is a Greek, and presumably, as he knew Ian Fleming, this is where Ian got the name. Many years ago, there was the possibility that I might have played Dr. No, who is a kind of mixture of Dr. Fu Manchu and anybody else you care to mention, really. It was rather interesting for me because the original Dr. No had contact lenses and steel hooks for hands. I've worn contact lenses in films, and in the hands of Orlak, I had steel hooks for hands. And the original Dr. No is 6'4" tall and made taller by his shoes, which make him appear to be about 6'8". And because I had done all the things on screen, in films, that Dr. No is described as doing, naturally I didn't get the part. That goes without saying. That is the logicality of the film business. How did I come to play Scaramanga? My good fortune is the answer to that. I didn't know that there was a Scaramanga at that time. There really was one, a man of that name. I assumed that Ian had found a very exotic name somewhere. And indeed it is a marvelous name. The business of having an extra mammary gland, as I think it's described in the film, or as it was described the other day as triple nipple, is in fact not as rare as you might think, because I asked my own doctor about that, and I said, you know, where should this nipple be? And he said, it must be under or over one of your own. And apparently it's not by any means as uncommon as you might think. Some people have quite a few, but it always follows the milk line of the female, like in the animal, you see, from north to south, so to speak, not from east to west. And in the film, of course, Roger wears his in the middle, which right away gives away the fact that it can't be real. Now, how did I come to play it? Well, they wanted a man who had played a few strange and bizarre characters, and I certainly think I could come under that heading. They wanted a man who presumably was known enough to the international cinema-going public all over the world that if they said that he was going to play the part, it might help to get people into the cinema. At least that's my hope. And they wanted a man who fitted the description of the part in the picture. And I was the one who was chosen. The fact that I happened to have been a distant cousin of Ian Fleming did in fact have nothing to do with it, because Ian's been dead for some years now. And he never lived, alas, to see me play a part that he had written, although he many times did say to me, I can't understand why you don't play in one of the Bond pictures.
of the other bizarre roles you played was Dracula. Do you ever regret playing that?
Oh, no, of course I don't, because playing that part made me an actor known all over the world. The only thing that I do regret is that I played it, in my opinion, at least 3 or 4 times too often. But I'm a working actor, and it is my job, as well as my vocation, to work, to act, and to be seen to be acting. Therefore, if you're offered a good role, which you perhaps to a certain extent made your own in contemporary terms, because lots of other actors have played it, I think you can't keep on saying no, 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 because if you keep on saying no when you're offered a part in the film, either people aren't going to continue to offer you anything at all, or the public is going to forget you because you don't appear in movies. This was one of those strange coincidences that one can't quite explain, cometh the hour, cometh the man kind of thing. And I just happened to be around at the time when this part was cast, and I happened to play it with the result that you know. It was a stepping stone in my career. It was nothing more than that, nothing less. It was a phase of my career. It was one of the parts that I have played, and that is the way I look at it, although it was a very great assistance to me at the time. And that started approximately 18 years ago, you know. And that may surprise people. And it stopped very nearly 4 years ago, and I will never play that part again. It's highly unlikely.
All the films that you have acted in, which is your favourite?
As a film or as a part?
As a part.
The best part I've ever had, undoubtedly, was Lord Summerisle in The Wicker Man, which was written by Anthony Shaffer, who wrote Sleuth, which has not received the attention or the recognition that it deserves as a film, which was also about the occult and about the powers of darkness in a totally different way, based on fertility rites and all that sort of thing, which again still happens today, and set in a modern setting. That was the best part I've ever had. No actor can complain if his opening sequence consists of 17 pages of dialogue, which I did in fact, devoted entirely, I may say, to himself, which I did in fact do with poor Edward Woodward, but fortunately for the peace of mind of the audience, and mine too, that was cut to the essential minimum. That was the best part I've ever had. The best picture, I suppose, I've ever worked in was probably The Private Life of Sherlock Holmes, which was directed by Billy Wilder, the greatest director I've ever worked with. The most effective and worldwide acclaimed picture that I suppose I've ever worked in was The Three Musketeers, and indeed The Four Musketeers. But the most effective picture from my point of view as an actor, for what it did for me and what it is still doing for me, of course, was The Man with the Golden Gun.
Christopher Lee, thank you very much indeed.
Not at all.
Quindi ci risulta chiaro che questo personaggio è un altro occultista e fa rabbrividire in che modo parla, prendendo in giro il pubblico di questi rituali, queste azioni a cui sono abituate queste razze elitiste, questi falsi attori, queste genealogie particolari. Perché dico genealogie particolari? Perché Christopher Lee dobbiamo andare a scoprire chi è. Allora, andiamo a vedere un po'. Christopher Lee. Christopher Lee, vediamo se mi apre la pagina. È un attore e musico inglese. Se n'è andato nel 2015, quindi è morto a 93 anni. 93 anni sono molti per un uomo che potrebbe essere della genealogia di cui parliamo sempre, ma andiamolo a scoprire. Il suo vero nome è Christopher Frank Carandini Lee. È nato a Belgravia, distretto del centro di Londra, figlio della contessa Stella Mari Carandini di Sarzano e del tenente colonnello Geoffrey Trollope Lee, che apparteneva al corpo reale dei tiratori del re. Condecorato e codecorato nella guerra dei Boeri, scusatemi, e nella prima guerra mondiale. Sua madre ha collaborato con diversi artisti famosi dell'epoca come Lavery, come Birley, come Snell. il suo nonno, il nonno di Lee, è stato un rifugiato politico italiano stabilito in Australia e la moglie di questo uomo era la soprano Maria Carandini. Dovete sapere che la famiglia Carandini, da cui proviene Christopher Lee, è una delle più antiche famiglie d'Europa e discende niente meno che da Carlo Magno. E a questa famiglia Federico Barbarossa diede il potere dello scudo d'armi del Sacro Romano Impero. Quindi un altro attore che non si è fatto dal nulla, ma veniva da una genealogia dell'antico Impero Romano. Lì fa parte dell'ordine Eccellentissima Ordine dell'Impero Britannico. È un crociato sacerdote. Lì ha collaborato con i Manowar, dovete sapere che è stato scrittore di testi, è stato musicista e ha collaborato con gruppi come i Manowar, come i Rhapsody. Allora andiamo a vedere un po' i Manowar. Molti li conosceranno, fanno un power metal, heavy metal, e questo gruppo è interessante perché tutti i testi sono ispirati a stregoneria e mitologia, molta mitologia del nord e mitologia greco-romana. I Manowar, per chi non li conoscesse, sono composti da Eric Adams, Joey Di Maio, Donny Hansik e Evie Martel. Joey Di Maio dovete sapere che ha lavorato come tecnico del basso e incaricato della pirotecnia dei Black Sabbath. Allora è strano come siano relazionati gli stregoni tutti assieme ad Hollywood. Famiglie di Carlo Magno che suonano con i Manowar, il cui componente Joe Di Maio parlano di stregoneria, mitologia, e uno dei componenti, Joe Di Maio, lavora per i Black Sabbath che parlano di stregoneria, mitologia, e Ozzy Osbourne è uno stregone che discende dalle streghe di Salem. Quindi quanta ciccia sul fuoco. Andiamo avanti perché dovete sapere che i Manowar hanno collaborato con Lee e con niente meno che Wells. Esatto, Orson Welles, il collaboratore cronista della Guerra dei Mondi radiofonica. Hanno collaborato lì, Christopher Lee ha collaborato anche con i Rhapsody, un gruppo italiano di power metal sinfonico composto da Turilli, Staropoli, eccetera eccetera. A me piacevano molto i Rhapsody, anche se i video fanno veramente schifo, e una canzone in particolare si vede che questa gente parla di testi antichi, cultura antica, si rifà a musiche e influenze di Paganini, di Bach, di Vivaldi, sono sofisticati. E i testi, a parte che vogliamo parlare della Nephilim Empire saga, i testi e tutti gli album e tutto il tema Rhapsody è interessante, e se leggiamo uno dei loro testi, dei testi delle loro canzoni: lamento eroico, langue in me l'ego infranto, al truce sguardo dell'angelo cieco, rovina in me l'antica rima, nel cuor del cigno ferito e morente, ercigno lo dico in romano, va bene, cosmi di eternità tradita, di verità svanite che ora versano lacrime d'addio in un vuoto nero, sincero e fiero al mio destino andrò, urla il tuono, al mio lamento eroico, sorte, consuma la realtà, spiriti di mondi arcani, chiedo la vita al di là della morte, per allinear stelle amiche e diventar guardiano celeste, custode di eternità guarita, di verità trovate per tutti i figli di madre terra. Sempre a lei ho dato la vita, la morte. Sì, continuerò. Urla il tuono al mio lamento eroico. Sorte, consuma la realtà. È interessantissimo, mi piace un casino questo testo, e questi sono occultisti. Tra l'altro sono legati con genealogie e tra di loro sono tutti la stessa famiglia. Andiamo avanti. Il cugino di Lee è Ian Lancaster Fleming, uno scrittore ufficiale dell'intelligence britannico conosciuto per essere il creatore della serie di spionaggio protagonizzate da James Bond. Che casualità. Questo Saruman. Quanti contatti. Andiamo avanti. E Christopher Lee è stato il Dracula in uno dei film più famosi su Dracula del passato. Christopher Lee è stato il cattivo di James Bond, è stato Dracula, è stato la morte, è stato Lucifero, è stato il conte Doku, è stato Saruman, è stato Lord Summerisle, non lo so leggere, cazzo. Ha scritto album heavy metal, discende da Carlo Magno. Si dice che ha perseguito i nazi nella seconda guerra mondiale. Questo ne ha fatta di strada il bimbo. Andiamo avanti. Lì per Hitchcock ha recitato nel Segno di Satana nella serie Le ore di Hitchcock. L'ora di Hitchcock. E allora dovete sapere che questa collaborazione con Albert Hitchcock è interessante perché Albert Hitchcock è un altro personaggio famosissimo di Hollywood, del cinema americano, del cinema. Vediamo un po', analizziamo brevemente questo personaggio. Nel film Vertigo, per esempio, se lo andiamo a vedere, fa un uso dichiarato del controllo mentale. Nel film North by Northwest menziona per primo la CIA e secondo un investigatore, Michael Minnicino, Hitchcock rivela dei contatti con Alexander Korda, che lo lanciò nel mondo dello spettacolo, e parla del legame tra Hitchcock e l'istituto Tavistock, fondata con sovvenzione dei Rockefeller, ed è l'istituto che si occupa del controllo dello studio sul controllo di massa, controllo mentale. È l'istituto che ha creato il fenomeno di Woodstock, che ha creato il termine teenager, che ha creato il termine hippie e i figli dei fiori. È stato chi ci ha direzionato tutto questo tempo. Quindi siamo sotto un controllo mentale dove la Chiesa ha creato gli illuministi quando la gente perdeva credenza su di lei. Ha ammesso di averli creati anni fa come antagonisti, così come si è trasferita adesso nell'era attuale nel grande occhio, il grande fratello, nella televisione. E quindi per noi adesso gli ierofanti, questi sacerdoti la voce di Dio per noi è il nostro idolo cinematografico o musicale, che fa parte delle stesse dinastie del puto Papa, e che con tecniche sonore, frequenze, con la dodecafonica, con il riff, come abbiamo studiato nel documentario sulla musica, l'istituto Tavistock ci manipola, e l'istituto Tavistock ricordiamo che ha lanciato personaggi come Hoffman, come Jung, come Freud. Spero vi sia piaciuta questa puntata, ci vediamo nella prossima molto presto. Io mi sono trasferito da poco e ancora ho i pacchi in casa, devo aprirli tutti. Stavo per dire spaccare perché è la prima cosa che mi viene in mente. Volevo ringraziarvi per le donazioni, volevo invitarvi a iscrivervi a Patreon. Se volete supportarmi potete farlo con una donazione libera su PayPal o iscrivendovi al canale. Non ha l'obbligo di permanenza, quindi potete fare una donazione lì o su PayPal. Grazie per chi l'ha fatto finora, grazie per sostenermi. Non immaginate come mi piace studiare questo è una cosa personale. Mi sveglio alle 5 forse per l'inquietudine che ho, non dormo, soffro di insonnia abbastanza e ricerco tutto il tempo, investigo, leggo documenti antichi, nuovi, tutto, da quando ero piccolo. Quindi non sapete quanto mi fa felice il vostro supporto. Una nota importante: ho un manuale per chi come me fuma e ha il pollice verde, il manuale definitivo su come produrre 1 grammo per watt. È un ciclo interessante, una tecnica mia personale che dopo tanto tempo ho scoperto essere la vincente. E per chi fosse interessato su questa tecnica, che qualcuno conoscerà, qualcuno ignora per le critiche brutte sul web, nei blog, allora io volevo sfatare un mito e farvi vedere una tecnica che funziona 100% e ti risolve i problemi di tempo, spazio, economici sulla luce, e non te ne esci dopo 3 mesi con solo 2. Va bene, e quindi per il fabbisogno personale facciamo un po' di bene alla società. Avete il manuale nel link. Un abbraccio e ci vediamo alla prossima.